Season 2, Episode 6, The Ruling, the mid-season finale. In the future, we open with a river filled with blood. We see some backpacks in the water and a little teddy bear floating down this trail of blood, and we see hands reaching out of the water. We see Wesley. He sees a deadhead in a car and he opens up the door and kills it with his knife. We hear Lincoln say from far, "You find anything?" Wesley says, "A rifle, that's about it." Lincoln and Tom walk down the road and Tom says, "We can't be far from the cabin." Lincoln says, "Nah, it can only be about another half an hour walk away from here." And then Tom says, "Let's see if this thing still runs." He goes and tries the car and it doesn't work. Then Lincoln checks another truck up ahead. And luckily, the truck starts up and Lincoln notices that it has less than half a tank of gas. And he calls over to Tom and Wesley and says, "This one's perfect, boys." Tom gets out of the car and he says, "How come every time I try to start a car, it's like, nope, sorry, we're dead. But then every time you try to start up a car, it's like, vroom, vroom." Lincoln says, "Well, you know what they say. The magician never reveals his secrets." Tom says, "Very funny. Let's go." We see Lincoln, Tom, and Wesley driving back to the cabin, and we see Lincoln and Tom in front, and Wesley is in the back of the truck, and he's looking out into the fields, and then we cut to inside the truck, and we see Lincoln and Tom says, "I'm glad we made it." Lincoln says, "Barely." Tom says, "The Vipers are a lot harder to take down than I thought, though." Lincoln says, "All we need is the right plan. Maybe somehow, some way, we find out some of their weaknesses and use it against them." Tom says, "Yeah, but what would that be?" Lincoln says, "I don't know." As we see Lincoln and Tom are still talking, we see Wesley in the back of the truck, and he's looking out at the fields as they drive by. Back at the factory, we see the two men that were patrolling drive the pickup truck back to the factory. We see Chris and his lieutenant named Alexander. Chris asks him, "You got something for me?" Alexander says, "You're gonna like this one." He then takes Gary's head out of the bag and Chris starts laughing his head off and says, "Well, look at this sorry-ass maniac. Couldn't handle the pressure of doing a simple fucking job. Anyway, you have anything else for me?" Alexander says, No, that's all we found out there." Chris asks, "So they left it." Alexander says, "Yeah, I'm sure they wanted us to find it." Chris says in a sarcastic manner, "No, really? You think they just left it right outside a patrolling location for us to say, huh, that's sad. Jesus Christ, grow a fucking brain a little bit for once at least." Alexander says, "Apologies, boss." Chris would look at Gary's head and says, "Of two evils, it is always best to vote for the least hypocritical." Alexander says, "I don't understand, boss." Chris says, "It means we're going to pay Mr. Lincoln a visit." And we see Alexander look a little scared about what's about to happen. Back at the military base, we see Kezia doing some target practice. Dave walks up to her and says, "Hey, they could really use some help on guard today." Kezia would nearly get a bullseye and look back at Dave and say, "My guard shift is tonight, asshole." Dave says, "Yeah, I'm aware, but they just need your help for about an hour. Kevin is sick and he's not going to be able to come today, unfortunately. So, if it's not asking too much," Kezia says, No, it's fine." Dave says, "All right, thanks, darling." And he starts walking away, and Kezia asks him, "You ever shoot a bow and arrow before?" Dave says, My dad was always pretty good at it. He used to really be into hunting quite a bit, but I never knew how." Kezia says, "Come try. I got 4 arrows left." Dave says, "All right." We notice Dave misses all 4 of them, and Kezia is trying to hold back her laugh as Dave says, "Oh, shut up over there." Kezia says, "Maybe I should just stick to the bow and arrow." Dave says, "For mine and your sake, it's better if you do." Dave walks away, and Kezia starts heading towards the guard post for her shift. Later that day, we see Lincoln, Tom, and Wesley pull up to the cabin, and we see Luke open up the door with a smile. And he says to Haley, "They're here." Haley and the kids' faces light up, and they run up to Lincoln and hug him. We see Haley ask him, "Are you alright, babe?" Lincoln doesn't answer the question and says, "They're dead. The men that attacked us, they're gone." Luke says, "What about the rest?" Lincoln says, "Yeah, that's what I want to talk to you all about. We'll stay here for the night just to figure things out of what we're going to be doing next. But until then," and he looks at everyone and all the remaining families from the suburban estates and his people and says, "I want 3 guards on at all times, making sure that no vipers try to come in here. We're going to all ride this out until tomorrow, and in the morning, we'll begin our new journey." Luke asks, "Where?" Lincoln looks back at him and says, "Somewhere else." A few hours later, the sun is about to set, and we see Chris and 50 other Vipers drive into a burned-out suburban estates. Chris looks around at the destruction and says, "They died quick. The others got away." One of his men says, "They're all dead. Wasn't expecting that so soon." Chris says, Nah, they got away. They can't be far away from here." We see Luke and Tom are both on guard for the night, and we see everyone inside of the cabin, and we see the families are sitting inside trying to stay warm. But not Ryan. Haley notices Ryan is sitting down and drawing something. Haley says, "Hey baby, you should probably try to stay warm." And Ryan says, "Almost done. There." Haley asks, "Let's see." Ryan shows her the first drawing, and it's a picture of their house that they lived in. And Haley says, "That's great, honey." And Ryan flips the page and shows her the other one that he drew. And she notices it's a picture of their house on fire. And Haley looks a little upset by seeing that. And Ryan says, "What do you think?" Haley quickly snaps out of it and says, That's great, baby. Now come and warm up for a bit." We see Lincoln and the others sitting in the cabin, and Tom comes in and says to Lincoln, "Hey buddy, Luke is on guard just for a few minutes, but I don't mean to intrude on a night with your family that you're trying to spend, but Wesley's been missing for a few hours now." Lincoln gets up and says, "What? What was he doing last?" Tom says, "I don't know. He said he was going to go out for hunting, and that was hours ago now. So I really don't know what to think." And Lincoln looks back at Haley and the kids and says, "We gotta go find him." Haley says, No, it's fine. Nathan's still gonna be on guard while you guys are gone anyway. It's fine." Lincoln kisses Haley and gives her his machete for protection and says, "Take this, alright? We'll be back soon." Tom gives Lincoln a rifle and says, "Let's do this fast." Lincoln and Tom start walking away from the cabin, and Luke runs up with a pistol in his hands and says, "You got room for one more?" Tom says, "Hell yeah." Back at the military base, we see Kezia on her way back to her place for the night, and she walks past Dave, and Kezia notices some blood on Dave's hands, and she pretends to not notice. Once Dave walks down the road enough, Kezia walks into that building that Dave just came out of, a little suspicious, and she says, "Hello? Is anybody there?" She then sees Sydney tied to a chair. Kezia looks shocked, and Sydney looks at her and says, "Now who the hell are you?" Sydney says, "No answer? Well, if you're not going to speak, can you do me a favor? Can you tell that piece of shit out there to back off for a little while? My head is killing me." Kezia asks, "Dave gave you those bruises?" Sydney says, "Who else would've?" "Let me guess, you're one of the many few people he's lied to, huh? One of his believers?" Kezia says, "What are you here for? Are you a viper?" Sydney laughs and says, "No. But from what your leader told me, you all are getting slowly killed by them, right?" Kezia says, wait. What's your involvement with any of this?" Sydney says, "Your son of a bitch for a leader almost killed me and my friends when we were trying to just go out on the road and we were trying to survive like normal human beings do these days. We won, and he lost, but not before he brutally hung one of our people, and we thought we killed him after the fight, but he survived and told me in order to keep his power, or the reason that God kept him alive on this earth, or some bullshit like that he found a reason to stay alive, apparently because of some girl named Kezia." Kezia interrupts and says, "I'm Kezia." Sydney says, "Ah, shit. Well, you're not gonna like this. Dave told me that when he took over this group, he killed a man named William and a bunch of his men, just so he could take over from him, and then, just to add to his lies, make people like you, I'm afraid, feel sorry for him so then he can swoop in and become the hero that everyone thinks he is. And I'm sorry to tell you, girl, but you've been drinking the Kool-Aid." Kezia looks like she wants to break down, but she quickly exits the building and steps outside of the building. She starts crying because now she knows the truth about Dave and that she's been lied to this whole time. We see Lincoln, Tom, and Luke walking in the woods with their guns, and Lincoln says, "If we don't find him in an hour, I'm going back. The prick doesn't deserve over an hour of my time. I'm only doing this because I don't want to see anybody die today." Tom says, "I'm sure this is just him being a stubborn prick and he doesn't want to come into the cabin like a little 4-year-old. Lincoln asks Luke, "You've known him the longest. Does anything come to mind of where he may have gone?" Luke says, "Well, I was thinking maybe he went back to the suburban estates. He didn't want to leave it before, and maybe he still can't." Lincoln says, "Well, Jesus, that place is way too damn far for me to go all the way back there on foot just to find him. He might be an asshole, but I don't think he's an idiot." Lincoln says, "All right, this is what we're going to do. You two," meaning Tom and Luke, "take left, search the general area and radio back if you find anything. I'll take right. We'll cover more ground that way." Tom says, "All right, if you get into trouble, holler." Lincoln says, "All right, meet me back in the cabin in an hour, with or without Wesley." 10 minutes later, we see Tom and Luke walking in the woods, and Luke says, "Fuck, it's getting cold. Winter's on the way soon. I can feel it." Tom doesn't answer, and Luke says, "What's going on?" Tom says, "Just bad memories." Luke asks, "What bad memories?" Tom says, "Of being out here in the woods at night looking for a missing person. I don't know. Something about this feels off." Luke says, "Forget about it, man. Let's keep going." We see everyone asleep in the cabin. We see Nathan, one of the guards, is on guard for the night. When out of nowhere, Chris shoots Nathan from a distance, and he tells his men, "Spread out!" We see the Vipers surrounding the cabin, and Chris gives them a signal, and they all shoot a few bullets in the air to get Haley and the others' attention. Haley, the kids, and the other families all wake up and quickly exit the cabin. When Haley steps outside of the cabin, she sees Chris and a bunch of his Vipers standing there with guns pointed at them. We see Chris step out. Haley notices dead Nathan on the ground, and Chris says, "Well, pardon the disturbance, folks, but I'm just here to ask a simple question." Haley says, "You had to kill someone on your way in here?" Chris says, "The prick was in my way. I made it quick, so you really should thank me for that." Haley looks mad, and Chris asks, "So, do any of you fine people know a man that goes by the name of Lincoln?" Haley looks a bit freaked out, and then Ryan says, "That's my dad." Chris smirks and says, "He is? Well, that's a fascinating development. Man, if we're not living in a world gone mad, I don't know what this world is. You see, we were just on our way to see him. Any idea where he might be?" We see no one in the crowd give him an answer, and Chris says, "Okay, fine. We're gonna move on to plan C now. Load them up." Haley looks super worried because everyone is being taken by the Vipers. We see Lincoln walking in the fields, and he notices some footprints on the ground that makes him a little bit on edge. Then he hears a gun click, and you hear Wesley's voice say, "Hands up, asshole." Lincoln looks pissed, and Wesley says, "Put your gun down. Now." Lincoln asks, "What is this?" Wesley says, "You know what this is." Lincoln says, "Oh, do I now, Wesley?" Wesley says, "This is never going to be over until one of us falls. Fortunately for me, I'll live to see my people," you hear that? "My people live years down the road from now." Lincoln says, "After everything I did, I could have let you die in that fire the other day, but I gave you the option to come with us. I guess that was the biggest mistake I ever made." Wesley says, "You want to hear about mistake, Lincoln? Mistake would be letting you people in, and you and Tom bring the Vipers right to our doorstep and destroy everything I built from day one of the end of the world. You did that, Lincoln, not me." Lincoln says, "Well, guess fucking what, Wesley? All your people can't fucking stand you now. Because you didn't grow the fuck up and lead your goddamn people like a good, decent person would do. And you're so hell-bent on killing me, you can't even accept that you're the one that truly fucked up. Take fucking responsibility, old man." Wesley says, "You're a goddamn murderer, Lincoln. All those kids, all those families that burned alive, that is because of you." Lincoln says, "People always judge me for doing the right thing." Well, man, I gotta tell ya, those days are fucking over. And we see Lincoln is about to try something when all of a sudden, we hear the sound of a gunshot, and then we see blood pouring out of Wesley's neck, and Wesley drops his gun to the ground. Wesley falls to his knees and looks at Lincoln in the eyes with pure anger. But then, Lincoln turns around to see who just killed him. We see Luke standing there with his gun, and we see Tom right behind him. And Lincoln looks at Luke, completely surprised, and Luke flips the gun over and hands it to Lincoln. Lincoln looks at Wesley and says, as he watches him die, "We're all murderers now." Lincoln points Luke's gun to Wesley's head and finishes the job by putting a bullet in his head. Lincoln, Tom, and Luke stand over Wesley's dead body, and Lincoln looks at both of them and says, "Let's get back." And Tom and Luke start walking off, and we see Lincoln take Wesley's gun, his jacket, his hat, and leaves everything else behind with him. As well, Lincoln leaving his past behind. Tom says, "You coming?" Lincoln puts the hat on and says, "Yeah." We see Haley tied to a tree, without her kids, without anyone, and we see Haley and she is surrounded by the vipers, and Chris comes up to her and says, "Welcome back." Haley in a panic says, "Where are my kids? Where are my kids?" Chris laughs and says, "Your kids are helping me prepare what Lincoln's gonna do next." Haley says, "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" Chris says, "Your kids are going to help me teach Lincoln his mistakes he's made as a leader. Meanwhile, you are going to help me with what comes next." And then the men untie her from the tree and put her in the back of one of the vehicles. And Chris and the Vipers drive off with Haley captured. Lincoln, Tom, and Luke are walking through the swamps, and they're on their way back to the cabin. And Tom says to Lincoln, "You know, I think you were right before about finding their weaknesses and let their weaknesses break them. That's what I need to start doing, not letting my weaknesses from my past dictate what I'm doing now." Lincoln says, "We're gonna have to do things that we'll probably never imagined we would do before." Tom says, "Damn right, and I'm ready for whatever comes next." We see they're about to cross the swamps when all of a sudden, Lincoln notices blood running down the river, and he notices little backpacks, arms and legs following down the river. Lincoln and the others are bothered by the smell, but then Lincoln notices Ryan's backpack is one of the backpacks in the river, and then he starts to panic. As he turns around, he sees all of the families and all of the remaining residents of the suburban estates' heads hanging off the trees. And Luke says, "Oh my God." Lincoln looks at all these heads with pure anger, but then he notices his kids. Ryan and Macy's heads are hanging off the tree, and Lincoln falls to his knees and starts crying as he watches his children's heads hanging off the tree. And painted on the tree in children's blood says, "You shouldn't have run." We see a man walking in the streets with a pistol. He then notices an old covered bridge. We see the man walk into the covered bridge. We see the man look at the hole in the bridge from where Tom and Dave fell, and the man gets contacted on his walkie-talkie. He then picks it up, and he says, "Just on a supply mission at the moment." And the person on the walkie-talkie would say, "Miles, we're counting on you to bring something useful back to the boss by the end of the day." We see Miles go back into his pickup truck and starts it up and starts driving down the road. And we see that Miles is now a part of the Vipers.